I'm taking the lead. Oh.
No, I'm taking the lead. Hey,
You're the
everybody.
man. Okay, you're the man.
Let's not get into that right away. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am joined by my friend Kayla, and we're going to talk a little bit about feminism and men's rights and whatever else comes up over the next however long we end up doing this. So this conversation was sort of initiated by some comments that we made to each other. I think Kayla, you made a comment on the Seth Andrews video where I was interviewed, and then I messaged you about it, and we kind of had a nice back and forth in YouTube messages, and we decided to just talk about it in front of the whole goddamn world.
So bigger world than I've spoken in front of before.
Everybody, this is Kayla. She's awesome. She's someone who I've talked to before. Actually, you were the co-host on the episode of Road to Reason that I did like a couple months ago over the summer. We seem to get along pretty good. So I'm going to turn things over to you because you are the one who sort of has the interest and you've done some research, you have your questions, so we're going to just sort of let you take the lead in this conversation. So I'm turning it over to you, Caleb.
Okay, so I'll explain a little bit about myself and like my experience with feminism and why you kind of stuck out to me and why I started making like comments on your videos and asking questions in the first place. So I used to be a Christian, a really hardcore Christian. I read the Bible like 5 times, completely through, memorized huge portions of it. And while I was in college, I was a part of a cult or a control group that was a little bit less of a control group, the ICOC. And near the end of my college experience, I started having doubts and stuff, and I started watching your videos, the Atheist Read series. And it really did help me walk away from what I believed about religion. It helped me with skepticism. And one of the things is I have an English degree. So I went to, at my university, I took a lot of gender studies classes because that's something that I was interested in. And so I was never like a real hardcore feminist, but I understood the idea of a patriarchy. I understood the idea of like, systematic oppression of like groups, and how that intersectional feminism. But it wasn't something that, like, after I left religion, it was something that became kind of like a non-issue for me, because I realized after I left religion that my life is self-determined. I get to make the decisions of my life. I'm not oppressed by anybody. And it just kind of got to the point where like feminism just became a non-issue. I just assumed that nobody really was oppressed outside of religion. You know what I mean? That there wasn't like that big of an issue, if any issue at all. I'm sure there's like, people who actually are sexist and stuff. So like recently, like I've been seeing a lot of comments and stuff about you, and I was very surprised to see what kind of controversy there was within the atheist community, especially because, some of your claims has to do with sexism within the atheist community, which I've never experienced. Like in my experience within the atheist community, if you have a good idea and you can back your idea, then you are respected just like anybody else.
Right.
And I'm a very strong person, so, I just don't take shit. And so I just never have experienced someone or felt like somebody has shot down an idea that was good based on my gender. You know what I mean? Like I've had my ideas shot down and I've been grilled on things, but it's never been because of my gender. And so it was very surprising to me to see a lot of these ideas of like, women being pushed out of the atheist community, and like this idea that, atheists should be feminists. Like that these two things should be like, not just that it can be, but that it should be.
Right.
Also the idea of feminism meaning just equality for women, which, between men and women, which we could talk about that too. Okay. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. But as for specific questions, I think that like, I guess we could just go over definitions. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, we can start there. No, I mean, do you want me? I have a couple of thoughts that I can respond to.
Just respond to my intro, and then we can talk about
yeah. Because I'm interested in what questions you have. I will say this as far as what you said in your introduction. I don't think it's my job to tell you that your experience was wrong. I mean, if your experience is that you haven't experienced sexism within the atheist community, then I'm very happy that you had that experience. You know, like I'm not going to tell you that, well, oh, well, you're wrong. You know, and if even, I'll even go ahead and say, if you feel like you haven't been oppressed as a woman, I'm not going to argue with that either, because I haven't lived in your shoes. I haven't had the experiences you've had. If you don't feel like you have been affected by the kinds of systemic oppression that feminists often talk about, then that's great. You know, I'm not going to argue with you about that.
Yeah.
But I will argue with the suggestion that systemic oppression doesn't exist. I think that is a very dismissive thing to say, and I think that there are enough people who have a contrary experience who will say, yes, I do feel like I have experienced oppression because I am a woman. Let's just say, since we're talking about feminism, that it's not enough for me to hear you say, well, I haven't experienced it, I don't think it exists, for me to go, oh, it must not be there. Because I, as a man, have not experienced it, because, you know, I don't think I've ever felt out of place, you know, because of my gender, because I was a man. But I have
not even a group of women.
No, actually, well, I've rarely been in that situation. You know, I mean, I guess maybe there have maybe one or two times when I was the only man in a group, or one of, you know, a minority of men in a larger group, where maybe it occurred to me, but it didn't wind up being an issue, you know. And I mean, I'm sure there are men who have had the opposite experience. I'm not trying to say that because I have never felt singled out or oppressed by, you know, being alone in a group of women, that doesn't happen. I'm sure that has happened to men before. But I just think that, to me, the notion that we live in a male-dominated society, which at its very most basic is what patriarchy means. I mean, it gets a lot more complicated than that, but at its most basic level, patriarchy just means that we live in a male-dominated society, and I don't see a valid argument against that. So if that has not been your experience, I'm very happy for you. And but I just don't think that applies, you know, broadly when we're talking about our culture as a whole.
All right. So I do have a couple questions. So when you're talking about systematic oppression, well, let's first talk about what it means to be oppressed. Like, what is a situation in which you would consider is oppressive? Like a specific situation, like something, like, give an example. You don't have to name names of something that somebody's told you where they say, this is oppression in my life.
Well, I mean, what about the way we treat women's healthcare versus men's healthcare? I mean, you know, I know many women, unfortunately, who have talked about how, you know, they decided that maybe they were pregnant and they decided to go have an abortion, and they, you know, were assaulted verbally on their way into the abortion clinic, you know, called a baby killer, or well, it's not, usually religious people. The anti-abortion movement is predominantly religious, but I think you also have to recognize that the targets of that movement, at least in terms of the patients, are all women. This is, and that there isn't really an equivalent men's healthcare issue where men have to face that kind of vitriol. You know, there are men's healthcare issues where men don't get enough attention, where men, you know, need more help than they get. But there isn't that sort of a situation where a man wants to get a completely legal medical procedure to which he is, you know, legally entitled, and he has to go through so many obstacles. And it's not just the anti-abortion protesters. It's the fact that there are, you know, last year, I know this because I mentioned in a 5 Stupid Things video a couple weeks ago, there were something like, I can't remember the exact number, but it was in the hundreds of anti-abortion pieces of legislation that were introduced in state legislatures all across the country. And something like 40 of them actually made it, you know, were enacted into law. And this is an issue that men just don't have to face. So if a woman, and I know, because I have asked women feminists this question. How would you respond if someone said, well, name an example of how women are oppressed? And the abortion issue is something that comes up right away, because to
Yeah.
me, because it's a very clear
Mhm.
example of something that women, an obstacle that women have to face and women
Yeah.
have to overcome in order to do something that men just don't have to face those kind of obstacles for.
The thing is, when it comes to the abortion issue, what we're talking about is a difference, just like something that is a biological difference between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Men will never have to get pregnant. Women
Right.
have to deal with biologically their entire lives this extra added part of their life, which is reproduction, which is their body does something completely different than men's bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about healthcare and we're talking about whether or not men and women are like, for instance, like, so when we're talking about like healthcare and we're talking about whether or not men and women are being treated equally, for instance, like, to me it just seems like the abortion issue seems like an important issue. Like, I do believe that women should be able to get abortions and have access to that kind of healthcare, and they should not be harassed for it. But it seems like an extra issue as opposed to an issue that, like, it's an extra issue that women have to face because of their biology.
Right.
Not necessarily because society is set up in a way to oppress women specifically.
Well,
And
but
I do agree that we should not be telling women that they should not do what they want with their bodies. But at the same time, we're talking about a group of people that are different than another group of people that have extra set of issues and things that they have to go through. Even if we got rid of the idea of patriarchy, or we got rid of in any kind of oppression whatsoever. And I do take issue with calling that oppression.
well,
With
I think we're
calling that
talking.
like,
I think we're talking about two different things, though. I
yeah.
mean, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't. I like the. I'm not saying that the oppression comes from the fact that women have to, pursue different kinds of
Mm-hmm.
healthcare because they're women. I'm talking about the
Yeah.
fact that they face harassment, and also not just harassment, but they face the erection of legal obstacles to stop them
Mm-hmm.
or make it more difficult for them to make use of these services
Okay.
that they need because of their biological requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that. Yeah, of course they're different. Of course,
Yeah.
women will require different healthcare throughout their lives than men just because of the biological differences. But that's not what makes it oppressive. What makes it oppressive is the different way that we treat women seeking healthcare versus men seeking healthcare. And like I say,
Okay.
I can't think of an equivalent in men's healthcare where not only do they have to face the kind of vitriol from other people, on their way to actually seek out
Mm-hmm.
that service, but also having certain factions within our political culture that are dead set against them doing it and will do anything they can to stop them from doing it.
Yeah. Which a lot of the times it has to do with the religious right.
Right. And I mean, the religious right is very patriarchal.
Yeah. I'm not denying that
So
necessarily. I'm not
no,
denying
I'm
that,
not.
yeah. And that's something we do need to push out. But whether or not our society as a whole has an attitude towards women that is patriarchal, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, a lot of it, I think, is no longer as explicitly patriarchal as it used to be. I think we're at the point now we've progressed enough to the point where I think someone, especially a man who
Mm-hmm.
expresses like a really overtly patriarchal attitude, who regards women, openly with derision and dismissal, or is really paternalistic and sort of like, okay, let's hear from the men now. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
that kind of obvious sexism is really frowned upon now in
Yeah.
our society, and I think that's a mark of progress, and I think that should be acknowledged. But I think the problem is that a lot of people feel that now that we have gotten to that point where we've all sort of, well, not all of us, but most of us have sort of come around to the fact that, okay, sexism is bad. Sexism is something that we should avoid. A lot of people think that that's all we need to do, that as long as we have consciously, recognized that sexism is bad, we have solved the problem. And the problem with that is that there are still implicit biases. There are still unconscious biases. I was talking with my wife the other day about the I don't know if you've ran across it in your research, but the John versus Jane study, where they showed resumes, identical resumes to employers, and the only difference between the resumes was one was headed by a male sounding name and the other was headed by a female sounding name, and the male sounding resumes were chosen more often than the female ones. And that's not because the employers or the people looking at those resumes were making a conscious decision to say, well, I don't want to hire this person, that's a woman. Like I say, I think that kind of overt sexism is not nearly as common in our country as it used to be. But there is still, I think, an unconscious bias. I think there is still, there are still attitudes that sort of tell us that, well, men are more fit to be leaders, men are more fit for this or that. You know, you can determine a person's fitness for a particular position based purely on your perception of their gender. And I think those things are still a problem. And I think a lot of what we call the patriarchy in the United States now is due to that sort of a thing.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about those specific instances, we can get really caught up on the outcome of the biases and not really ask the question why these biases are there. For instance, I was having a conversation with a feminist friend, and we were talking about how women tend to not have their medical needs in general. Like when a woman walks in, and I've experienced this, where I walked into a doctor's office and I felt like my complaints about my health have been taken less seriously.
Right.
Granted, I didn't have a huge medical issue. I was worried about a medical issue that did not exist. I really was walking into the doctor's office asking for them to check me out just to make sure I was okay. And I did it several times within a couple months because I was having some stomach issues. So they began to stop taking me as seriously. And this happens to a lot of women because women tend to take care of, from my estimation, what I see, women tend to take care of their health better. They tend to go to the doctors more. They tend to bring their kids to the doctors more. Doctors see more women. So let's say, and I'm not sure if this is true, I don't have statistics in front of me, men don't go to the doctors as often, de facto, just because women go more. It's just, you know, ratio. But when men do go to the doctor, they go for very serious reasons. So let's say a man and a woman walk into the doctor's office and they're both crying about something. You know, they're not like literally crying, like they're saying, I'm hurting right now. In your head, you're going to have the bias towards the man because you assume that his foot's falling off because he's at the doctor. So we could say that's horrible bias, oppression towards women, or we could say that this is an outcome of biases that are based on behaviors of men and women. So I think that when we have these discussions, if we try to force doctors to stop being able to prioritize, you know, what they're thinking. I mean, thinking about their biases is fine, but it seems like a bad thing to say that you're not allowed to prioritize and make prejudgments about people based on what your experiences are, because then you couldn't prioritize a man whose foot might be falling off. Right. You know,
I'm definitely not saying that doctors shouldn't be allowed to prioritize based on their experience. But I mean, even in that example that you just gave, I would agree with you based on how you described it, that the bias is that there isn't a good explanation for it, you know, given like you said that women tend to go to the doctor more often and tend to keep on top of maybe less serious issues, whereas men only tend to go when they're about to die. And that has been my experience as well, by the way. I never go to the doctor. But but just because there's an explanation for it doesn't mean that it's okay and that it doesn't.
No. Well, I think that understanding why these things happen will help us understand whether or not there is a system that's meant to oppress women. Is it oppressive for women to not have the same kind of seriousness taken towards their minor illnesses? You know what I mean? Like, for instance, thinking back, I think to myself, was it wrong for those doctors to they weren't being mean. They weren't being dismissive.
Oh, of course
not.
They
were just letting me know, like, you can calm down, because I can be an anxious person. You can calm down. You're fine. You're not going to explode. You're good, right? Right. Is it wrong for a doctor to to make those judgments and
Yeah, no,
see
of
a
course
man
not.
walking in and maybe take that more seriously. For instance,
Of course not.
I was listening to a talk. It wasn't a talk. It was a conversation that Peter Boghossian was having with Molyneux. What's his name? Molyneux. He's
Oh,
like,
the libertarian guy,
yeah, he's
Stephen
like,
Molyneux.
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you
He's
mean.
funny. He's hilarious. I don't really listen to his stuff. I find him a little bit obnoxious, but
Yeah, we're
I have a friend. I have a friend who really likes him. And I was like, yeah, your guy M, your guy Molyneux. So, but at any rate, he was having a conversation with him, and he was describing this experience that his wife had had because his wife is a director of a hospital or something like that, where a guy walks into her office and walks up to her desk and asks where the director is.
right.
Is it wrong for him to ask that question? Because I mean, seriously, like when, for instance, I have a black friend, and we were talking the other day about like, and he looks like, like piercings, tattoos everywhere, looks like this big tough guy. And he was talking about Shakespeare, and I was all like, "Oh, have you read any Shakespeare's plays?" And he was like, "Yeah, I actually played in a bunch of them. I was in my theater club in college." And
Right.
I was like, "Oh," because you don't expect this guy that doesn't look like a theater kid to be a theater kid, and so because it doesn't happen as often,
Right.
and that's what
Well,
I'm saying is that there are less women leaders. Therefore, it would be more surprising, and you know what I mean. So
yeah.
that
Well,
unconscious bias might be warranted in a way. And it might be negative for us to try to blame people for having that thought, because as soon as he walks out of that office, he has the opposite thought.
I don't think we should blame people. I want to make that clear. I don't think,
Yeah.
and your example where you mentioned like the guy who asked the director who was the director because he assumed that the woman wouldn't be the director.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily fair to say to blame that person, right? Because especially if you're talking about an unconscious bias, it's something that you're not aware that you have. So it's not always very helpful to put personal blame on somebody for
Yeah.
acting in accordance with an unconscious bias. And like many other issues that not just feminism but social justice movements in general deal with, you're not dealing with it on an individual basis, right? That's why so much attention is paid to systems of oppression, because the goal of a social justice movement like feminism is not to fix the attitudes or the assumptions or whatever of every single person. The
I would
goal,
disagree.
the
I would
goal is,
disagree.
well, the goal is to change the system,
Yeah.
is to reform the system. And in reforming the system, yes, of course, you do have to change people's minds. I mean, it's not like the individual never comes into play, but a feminist shouldn't, or at least probably wouldn't, if a feminist is engaged in these kinds of issues, they probably would be less concerned with that one person who mistook the woman, for not being the director. They would be less concerned with him as an individual and
You must
place the
not
blame
know
on
the
him.
feminists that I know.
Well, I'm not saying that feminists would be thrilled. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm sure especially women who are much more active in feminist circles than I am, probably encounter that sort of thing all the time. So it's probably a lot more withering for them when
Wait, why would they? Wait, what? They would experience that what all the time?
they would experience either firsthand or hearing stories about women, men mistaking women in the way that your example.
Yeah.
Well, like the old joke about, the doctor, the patient on the table, the father and the son, and the punchline of the joke is that the doctor is the kid's mother, because everybody assumes that the doctor would be a man, not a woman.
Yeah.
I think people who are more engaged in feminist argument and feminist discussion and activism probably hear those kinds of stories all the time, so they might be a bit more if they heard that story, and they maybe they might be a little more resentful toward that guy, even though that it might not be fair to be resentful toward that guy. But the concern is the culture that conditions us to have these biases. So it's not wrong that he asked that question. If the guy comes up and says, excuse me, where's the director? And it doesn't occur to him that the person he's talking to is the director because she's a woman, it's not his fault. And it's not his mind alone that should be changed. It's the culture that conditions us to naturally sort of assume that a woman isn't a leader.
And there are different. Is it culture or circumstance?
Well,
because when I think of culture, I think of okay, there is a set of unspoken rules, basically. So you know, we might have a gaming culture, or we might have a religious culture, and there's a certain set of unspoken rules, and if you step outside of that, you're going to be punished. As opposed to, oh, well, there's a certain amount of women who go into this field and it's a lot less than men, therefore that you're just going to assume that the director is going to be a man. That doesn't seem like culture. Well, it seems like circumstance.
Circumstance can determine culture, though. And
there's not even a social taboo against women being directors. There isn't even a social taboo.
Not explicitly, but I think one of the ways that we could correct this, and I would go back to your earlier example about the men not going to the doctor as often. You know, one of the ways long term that we can correct those sorts of biases and erase those sorts of assumptions is to change the circumstances. With the women versus men going to the doctor, we can encourage men to go to the doctor more often, which would be a good thing for everybody. I know I'm sure I would be better off if I went to the doctor more often. You know, I'm sure lots of men who don't go to the doctor would be better off if they went to the doctor more often. And if men going to the doctor more often for regular checkups and whatnot became more of a cultural norm, then that bias would fade. And if more women, and if more women were directors or CEOs or in positions of leadership, which is a trend. I mean, that is something that is happening more often.
Yeah.
And once we get closer to parity in terms of women, you know, filling traditionally male roles and being accepted and everybody getting used to it, hopefully that sort of conditioning, that sort of assumption will fade too. So it's not always about, you know, telling people just sort of, okay, just change the way you think or be aware of your biases. I mean, that's very important, but changing the circumstances that sort of reinforce that bias is very important as well.
Yeah, and that's okay to the extent that we are not talking about changing something that might be biologically inclined, for instance.
Okay.
Like, for instance, I was listening to something the other day, and I'm not going to give justice to it because I didn't really listen very closely. It was about the differences between men and little boys and little girls. Little girls read a lot more than little boys.
Yeah.
So the idea is that we should encourage little boys to read more, right? Well, what if women, little girls, are just more inclined to read? That they are more inclined to want to sit down in a place for a long period of time and read, and they want to read certain things, for instance. So they're going to read little books about my little sister. I grew up in one of the most egalitarian homes whatsoever. Like, my mom did construction.
Right.
I came home one spring break from college and I couldn't find my mom, and I was like, Dad, where's my mom? And he's like, oh, she's up in the attic. I was like, what's she doing up there? And he's like, putting down insulation. Like, my mom, she is a tough motherfucker.
Right.
She is intense. I love my mom. She's a stay-at-home mom, though.
Right.
She wants to be a stay-at-home mom, and she wants to be in this role that she's more comfortable with, you know. And so I think that when it comes to, and what the point that I was trying to make is, I live in a very egalitarian home. I was never told that I couldn't do things because I'm a woman. My dad took me out and taught me how to fix cars, and I know how to grout a bathroom and do drywall and fix things. I have a toolkit in my closet.
Yeah.
So even with all that, I decided to get an English degree, arts and humanities, that I'm not going to get as much money in. That was a decision that I made because I enjoyed reading more.
Right.
The kinds of books that I read are different than my sister reads. Even though we grew up in the same home, my brothers tend towards the same things that I would read, because in certain ways I'm not extraordinary, an outlier to some of these things. But my sister, she likes shoes. She just naturally likes shoes. She would go over and put people's shoes on. And she reads books about teenagers, teeny boppers, and, like, you know, notebooks, like a little girl's actually written in a notebook and he's talking about Jordan, the cute boy that lives next door, you know.
Right.
And I never read that kind of stuff. But what if women are more inclined to do those sort of things, to be more social and to go towards more careers that are more caretaking careers? What if that's more biologically inclined? What if men are more biologically inclined to be more aggressive and forthright and competitive? So
Right.
they would be more in competitive fields that takes a lot of stress. Those kinds of things I think need to be taken consideration before we try to say, oh, it has to be 50-50 in order for us to have conquered
Right.
equality. I think
Well,
equality should have more to do with your choices as opposed to the outcome of those choices.
oh, I agree. I think one of the places where you and I probably diverge, one of several places, is that we would both agree that people's choices and people's freedom to choose is of utmost importance. But I think
Mm-hmm.
I would be more likely to say that just because a person feels as though they are free to choose, and maybe legally speaking is free to choose anything they want, that doesn't mean that they are as free as they might be. I think I put a lot more weight on things like on social pressures,
Well,
whereas I think,
ultimately,
and
yeah.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to speak for you.
No, I interrupt. So what you need to do is just say, Kayla, shut up for a minute. I'm going to finish what I'm going to say.
No, go
Seriously,
ahead.
like I respect people who do that.
I don't want to
So
do
are you
that.
going to finish?
I'm
You finish what you're
no,
going to say?
I'm finished what I was going to say. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I forgot what I was going to say. No, I do. What was I going to say? Oh, I'm more of a determinist when it comes to free will. So I
Right.
don't think that we, in reality, in the big scheme of things, have free will.
Right.
I don't think that I think that everything has to do with our biology and social upbringing.
Okay.
So
Well, I think maybe
ultimately,
we would just move the slider toward different directions, because I think both of those are important too. But I would generally speaking, I would be more, in terms of how we behave and how we sort of think about each other and our social interactions, I would be more apt to say that the social side of that is more influential
yeah,
than the biological side.
I'm definitely more. I think
Yeah.
that biological, like I think the biological side has a lot more to do with it, and you can
Right.
see this when it comes to gender and sexuality. You can see this very clearly that biologically people were born that that have a woman's brain. They're going to have that be a
Well,
part of
but
who they are.
that's not
You know,
necessarily that's not necessarily a physical difference, though. I mean, there is definitely evidence that there is a male brain and a female brain in terms of how the brain
yeah.
works and how people think. But
But they've
there's
also
no,
done
but
twin studies too,
right,
like where they have like twins that are grown up in separate households, and they both became gay anyway.
right, yeah,
Even though they completely different upbringings. What I'm saying is that there's huge portion of I was bought pink things when I was a kid.
right,
And as soon as they found out that I didn't want pink things, they didn't do that to me anymore. But I didn't want pink things. I mean, I
right,
like pink now, but I like red better. But like what I'm talking about is
yeah,
that my sister chose what she wanted based off of what she likes. And we do continue what she likes because she's going to read only certain things, so that's what we're going to give her. So
right,
we could talk about, for instance, I have two
right.
brothers. Let's just talk about one gender for a second.
Okay,
I have two brothers, my brother Daniel and my brother David. They are amazing people, very smart and really just amazing people, but they were raised exactly the same way because they're only a year apart.
right,
Almost exactly the same way. My brother Daniel is going to be a scientist. He's interested in scientist things. He's
hmm,
interested in the way things work. He reads books about. I gave him a chemistry textbook for his birthday one year, and he just read it all the way through. He's 14
yeah,
years old.
wow,
That's what he likes to do. He gets bored in science class. He only gets B pluses because he sits there and he's just all like, "Ugh, physical science." Like
right,
so. But my brother Daniel, David, he's completely opposite. If I'm going to give him a tool, so basically for tell me if I'm making any sense. So basically for Christmas this year, I gave them an old computer, an old laptop computer to take apart because I know that they both want to go in computer science. I gave Daniel the book and David the toolkit because David likes to take things apart. He's going to be a tinkerer.
right,
You could say that me giving him the toolkit and Daniel the book is discrimination in a way because I'm giving Daniel a career or encouraging him towards a career that's gonna give him more money than a mechanic or a technician or someone that takes things apart. But that's just who they are.
right.
Ultimately, I'm giving them things that they want. Even if I gave Daniel the toolkit and David the book, they would have swapped anyway.
Hmm.
And Deanna would have
Yeah.
read the book and told David what to do. So I can already tell what careers they're going to go into and how they're going to live their lives and what decisions they're going to make. Ultimately, I don't think that me encouraging this guy in one way and then encouraging this guy in another way is discrimination necessarily,
Well,
even though I know that David's going to make less money.
Yeah. No, I don't consider that discrimination either. I don't think I think the problem isn't that we should be steering people away from areas that they show like an aptitude for. But I think a lot of times what does happen is that people are steered away from areas that they have an aptitude for because of an assumption about their appropriate gender role, you know. And the thing is, this happens for reasons other than gender roles too. I mean, in my wife's family, both she and her sister showed a great aptitude and a great interest for art in different ways. Like I think her sister was interested in music. My wife was interested more in visual art and then eventually also in writing. And her parents discouraged them both from pursuing this. You know,
what did she encourage them to do?
To pursue careers where they would be able to earn more of a stable living. I think the assumption, like I think her sister eventually got certified as a paralegal, and my wife eventually managed a library. So you know, they were encouraged to not pursue like the artistic career, and that wasn't. I don't think that was really a result of any kind of a gender bias, but it's an example that, you know, for whatever reason, we turn people away from things that they show an aptitude for, and we push them in other directions. And I think when this happens to little girls who maybe didn't have parents like you, who didn't encourage their interest in their things that they just naturally sort of showed an interest in, that's why we end up with these kind of inequalities. And I would also say you've mentioned a couple times, you know, like you chose to pursue an English degree, right? Which I did too. You know, I'm a fellow English major. That's something that we have in common.
I know. I don't know if you remember, I commented on a video a long time ago about that. I was like, "Where are you from?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, I'm from Maryland." And I was like, "Ah, cool." You know, I went to University of Maryland. So anyway.
English majors unite. Yes. Yeah. But anyway, so I mean,
got us far, right? A lot of money.
I got a YouTube channel. I haven't used my degree at all. But so you brought that up, that you know, because that was what you wanted to do, you chose an education path that you thought.
Well, it was a deeper reasons for it.
Well, I know, but as for me, but you know, you brought it up a couple of times that you know, people don't necessarily choose their career path based on how much money they're going to make, you know, and which is true, and which I think is there's not any problem with that at all. Like I don't think how much money you make should be the number one determiner. You know, I think we'd all be a lot happier if we made enough money, but if we didn't, you know, follow the money to such a you know, an extent. But I hear
when you're done, don't let me forget this.
Okay. I'll remember. But
I keep interrupting. Sorry.
No, you're okay. We're not having a debate. We're just having a chat.
No. It's fun. I love doing this. I'm a little bit intense when it comes to conversations, just because I'm like this and I dislike you or think you're an idiot, which I don't. You know, so
that's good.
I'm just like this.
Yeah, no, but I've heard people make similar statements like that when people argue about the wage gap and the gender gap in terms of how much money people make. And a lot of people seem to think that the wage gap is just due to people choosing less lucrative careers. And I don't think that the statistics bear that out. You know, I think if you look within fields, you still find a wage gap, you know, because a lot of times people who are really, really dismissive of it will say, well, it's because women go and get gender studies degrees, and how do they expect to make money with that? And they either are ignorant of the fact, or they just ignore the fact that even if you look in high paying fields, women tend to make less than men.
Yeah.
So clearly it's not just, well, women just are naturally inclined to pursue less lucrative careers. And it seems to me like people who make that argument, and I'm not saying that you are necessarily doing this, but a lot of times when people make these sorts of arguments, they're basically saying this isn't a problem, we shouldn't worry about it, which is just a way of saying things are fine the way they are. It's a way of defending the status quo and trying to protect the status quo. And most of the people who make those arguments, not all of them, because, you know, clearly there are women who have problems with feminism, but most of the people who make those sorts of everything is fine, don't worry about it, stop trying to change things arguments are people who benefit from the status quo, you know, and I have a little bit of a problem with that.
There's a couple things I'd like to make a point
on. Go ahead. Go for it.
Oh God. The first, I might just be one thing because I can't remember what the second thing might have been.
Okay.
So the first thing I'd like to do is go back to what we were talking about before, and this might tie into the wage gap a little bit. We can go into that, but I wanted to make a point that when you talk about how much of, how much of things are women's choices, and I have stomach issues, so I'm like, ugh. When we're talking about how much of these things are women's choices and how much is cultural, we don't have studies on that. We don't have something that determines how much of women's choices are cultural and how much of them are just determined. And I think that it can be a fallacy, and not maybe a fallacy, logical fallacy, but can be an issue if we try to rush forward like a bull and try to push forth legislation based off of something that we haven't determined is true yet or true enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you said, we might have a difference of an opinion on how much of this is determined and how much of this is, you know, determined by biology and how much of it is determined by sociology. But how are we going to talk about, how are we going to, if it is mostly biology, what we're doing isn't going to change a whole lot, and it might actually push women towards things that might make them unhappy, or might make them not it might not be something that they're more inclined to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
So that was one of them. The second thing I'd like to talk about is I read a couple different, I was very specifically interested in the wage gap, because the wage gap is a real thing. You know, I think it was like 7% is largely unaccounted for, but it wasn't. I read two things. I read The Simple Truth, and this is by a women's group.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've seen that.
It's very interesting because they're not very specific. Like, it's kind of an overview report. So there was a lot of questions that I had. Like, basically, they had one little thing about women's choices. And they talked about how 7% isn't accounted for women's choices, but they were specifically talking about women's choices when it comes to what degree field they're going into. And it doesn't actually talk about like women's choices when it comes to, it almost kind of like dismisses women's choices when it comes to motherhood and things like that. So I'm not sure whether, they didn't make it clear whether or not that was factored in when they're talking about that 7%. This Pew Research poll, though, which I haven't finished reading, and I really want to finish it, and when I do, we're going to have another conversation.
Okay.
This one is really interesting because it talks in the very beginning about the motivations of women. And it talks specifically, there's a phrase here that I really, really appreciate. It says that, let me try to read from as close to the beginning as possible. Yet there is no guarantee that today's young women will sustain their near parity with men in earnings in the years to come, because they're near parity at this point, says the Pew poll.
Yeah.
Recent cohorts of young women have fallen further behind in their same aged male counterparts as they have aged and dealt with responsibilities of parenthood and family. For women, marriage and motherhood are both associated with less time spent paid on work-related activities. For men, the onset of family responsibilities has the reverse effect on their career, meaning they feel more responsible for their family financially, and so they tend to go back and work more and have more of a hand in their thing in the workforce. The Pew Research survey finds that among working parents of all ages with children younger than 18, mothers are 3 times as likely as fathers to say that being a working parent has made it harder for them to advocate in their job or career, 51% versus 16%. The survey also finds that women are much more likely than men to experience family-related career interruptions. Among mothers who have ever worked, 39% say they have taken a significant amount of time off of work to care for their child or family member. This compares to 24% of working fathers. Women who have experienced a significant career interruption in order to care for a family member have few regrets. They overwhelmingly say they are glad they did this, even though a significant share say it hurt their career overall. For their part, young women today who have not yet have children expect that when they do, the impact on their careers would be negative. It's interesting because what we're talking about is not just what happens, but women's motivations. Based on what this says, based on what they say their career, their thing is, and I have also printed out all the questions, which I was reading through I need to read through all the questions because I was doing that with the online harassment thing. If we go based on what this says, it seems that women may choose career options that allow them to take care of family and kids, or allow them to take time off, or allow them to take hits in their careers. If you're thinking to yourself, I'm okay with taking a hit in my career because I would prefer to spend certain time with my kids, and then you're going to make career decisions where you're even coming out of college. I'm going to choose a job that's going to allow me time off, and that's going to be a lower paying job,
right,
and not as intense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I thought about going to law school for a minute, but I didn't want to spend 5-6 years trying to get a law degree and then go into a career and not have kids and a family. I don't know if that's something that I want to do. And what I'm saying is that when we're talking about women's choices, we're not just talking about this concrete, do women choose women's studies degrees as opposed to STEM degrees. We're also talking about career choices when it comes to what you're thinking about life and family. And I'm not sure if it's a bad thing that women decide when they're going into the career fields to take jobs that are going to allow them more flexibility if it has a hit in pay, because there are women who don't choose that as well.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that women should be pressured to make choices other than what they want to make. I do think it's important to consider the context in which these choices are made. However, I had a Twitter argument with someone a couple of days ago that wound up being about the wage gap. And they actually, in trying to, in arguing against me, they showed me I think it was a Harvard study about the wage gap and about ways to close the wage gap, to close whatever gap remains. And the conclusion that this Harvard study came to, and the reason this person was showing it to me was they felt they wanted to show that they wanted to disprove my suggestion that that a lot of it is due to sexism, to unconscious sexism, unconscious bias. And what it actually wound up doing to me was illustrating the fact that a lot of the gap that results from women making different choices is due to the fact that many employers organize their business and organize their determining who gets paid what and how much each employee is worth, etc., based on a very male privileged assumption. So that the fact,
give me an example of that. What do you mean?
What you said about how women who have children tend to value more flexible hours, right?
Yeah.
Because they want to have more time to take care of their kids. They want to have more time to be there for their kids. And as a result, they suffer for that professionally. And
apparently they're fine with. Well, I'm just kidding. I'm not making a blanket statement. I'm just saying based on the study, it seems that women are okay with that sacrifice.
They may be fine with it because they don't really see like that they have a choice. Or maybe if you ask a woman, or any parent, probably if you ask a parent point blank, would you rather have spent time with your children, or would you rather have worked more and made more money? Of course, most people are going to say they don't regret spending time with their kids. I mean, that doesn't necessarily translate to I'm okay with, the way things are in terms of gender inequality and pay. It just means that if this is the choice that I have, this is the choice that I made. But the Harvard study suggested that one way in which we could further close the wage gap, because the gap has closed quite a bit since the 60s. The gap is
near parity, apparently.
Well, I wouldn't. Well, it depends on what number you're looking at. If you look at the
I was just looking at the Pew Research poll. That's all.
right, if you look at the it's near parity in terms of young people. I have seen that, but in terms of like
yeah, it was saying millennials specifically. It's a report about millennials.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that. I did a video about the wage gap a couple months ago, and that was one of the things I mentioned is that it grows with age. You know, older women have a bigger gap than younger women. But one of the things that the Harvard study suggested to close the rest of the gap is to sort of reform this assumption that flexibility is bad, or that, you know, the only thing that we can do to reward employees is to reward them, you know, when they are available to work all hours, to sort of change, just shift the paradigm so that people are not professionally penalized for wanting for wanting more flexibility in their schedules.
In certain fields, you can do that. In certain fields, you can do that, but there are certain fields that you cannot do that. And a lot of them are those high-paying positions, those CEOs, those people who, you know, politicians. They have to work a certain amount of time. It comes with the job. There is no changing that job to make it more flexible, make it more feminized, make it more flexible for women. If you become the president of the United States, I don't care what your genitals look like, you're going to have to work a certain amount.
Of course.
So women might, I'm not saying this is what's happening, because I don't have statistics in front of me that talk about why women choose what they choose. I'd love to see a study like that. And that's why I thought this, I really want to read this Pew Research thing. But when we're talking about changing a work environment to make it more suitable for women, there are just certain work environments, certain fields that would not work if there's not a certain amount of competitiveness to it. If there wasn't a certain amount of high risk jobs, I could say.
Right.
These high risk jobs, and I don't know, I think that to me, it seems more likely that women wouldn't choose those high risk jobs, specifically because they would rather choose something that's more, what's the word? Safe, I guess you could say. Consistent. What's the better word? Safe, consistent. What's a word for something that's secure? Like secure. A secure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they might want more secure job because they're thinking about their family and kids later. They don't want to make all this money now and then maybe lose their job because they have a family. They want to have a job that actually allows them to do certain things, and those low risk jobs that might have more flexibility are going to pay less because you're not risking as much. You're being paid for the risks you're taking.
Well, you know, another thing to consider also is that, I mean, there's no reason why men can't benefit from a work environment where there's more flexibility as well.
No,
I mean,
not at all.
So when we say that, when we say, well, you know, what would happen if we make certain jobs more hospitable to women, that's not really the right thing to say. What we're saying is if flexibility were valued more, or at least if flexibility were not penalized as much. And you're right, there are certain jobs where there's less room for that.
It's a risk job.
Yeah.
You're taking a risk job.
And they're
high paying too.
Yeah, sure. And that's fine. But there's no reason why women have to be the only ones who benefit from it. Again, we're getting into sort of assumed gender roles where, I mean,
not just assumed gender roles. Thoughts about, like, let me make something clear.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about whether or not something is mostly determined or more determined by biology as opposed to like a gender role that's set by society, we're talking about two different theories that seem to explain the same thing. They're competing theories, and I'm assuming that you would agree that when you have competing theories, when you have a theory and it's the only theory that explains everything, like evolution, if there's a theory that comes along and they're just like don't have anything that kind of backs what they're saying, then you can still keep the same amount of trust that you have or agreement or belief in that theory, right? But if something came along that explains a lot of the same things, if not most or all the same things as evolution, then we would not believe, not put as much on a scale of 1 to 10, you wouldn't be a 10,
Yeah.
you'd be more of a,
I see what
a
you're saying.
5
Yeah, you would.
on both. You just like, it puts more doubt in you.
I see what you're
What
saying.
I'm saying is that this is the same thing. When you say gender roles, I think it could be that, or it could be this other thing. And until we can determine how much of what it is, I think that saying it's gender roles that are determined by society might be a little bit putting a lot of trust in that idea might be a little bit not smart.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when I'm saying, for instance, that I think a lot of it is biology, I am expressing my own opinion, and I'm not saying that this is something. I'm not a 10 on that scale. I'm more of a 5. You know.
Right.
So and it's the same. Yeah. Anyway, that was my rant.
No, that's fine.
Like I said, you can always tell me shut up.
I get what you're saying. You did mention something earlier, just sort of as you were responding to something I said. You mentioned, we should be careful about using the sorts of things that I'm saying as a basis for legislation, and that's something else that I don't know if we agree on or not, because the only things I can think of in terms of legislative fixes at this point, like for what I perceive as gender inequality, are things to just sort of encourage more transparency, like especially with the wage gap. The only
and that's
legislative
good for everybody too.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
Transparency is good for everybody.
The only and transparency, a lot of people don't realize.
Abortion rights. Well, I would call them choices. The choice to abortion. I wouldn't call abortion a right, but
well, legally it is. I mean,
it is.
Legally speaking, abortion is a right. Yeah, I mean,
what do you mean by that?
What
makes something legally a right?
I mean, if you are pregnant and you want to have an abortion, in most circumstances, you're legally entitled to have one.
Oh, okay. All right. If that's the definition of a right, then I can see that. Yeah.
I mean, we can argue over whether or not it's a natural right or not, but in terms of
yeah, but I mean, if it's a legal right now, that's not something that I can't go around calling it not a right if it is. So,
right.
Legally.
But the abortion issue, there are definitely, we could maybe make it clearer, legally speaking, that the sorts of laws being passed to limit access to abortion are onerous and should not be allowed. But in terms of pay equality, the only thing I can think of is passing laws to encourage transparency, which is actually the law already. I mean, a lot of people might not realize it. Wage transparency is already
like 70s or something, right?
Yeah, you already
second wave feminism.
Yeah, you already have
the legal.
Nobody's against that. It's always the third waves that get the short end of the stick. But most people,
because a lot of it's theory. It's this ambiguous, like you have to kind of like believe either this or that. Like we're talking about.
People said the same thing about the second wave 30 or 40 years ago.
I'd like to see that.
But I mean, most of the anti-feminist arguments are not really new. They're just translated to whatever the current situation is. People said the same thing about second waves. People said the same thing about,
Not a lot of the feminist arguments aren't new either.
No, they're not. But they're translated to different circumstances. I mean, I think what a lot of people don't really understand about third wave feminism is that it's not fundamentally any different from basic fundamental feminism. It is asking people to focus on different things, to make feminism more diverse, to make feminism more intersectional, to make feminism more aware of different areas where women experience oppression and different forms of oppression, but ultimately it's not really any different than any other form of feminism. But anyway, I don't
know enough about the history of feminism to know that. So I can't speak on that necessarily, whether it's similar or not. I just know that feminism as it stands today seems to be more. The thing is, they say some good things. There's some good things in what they say. It's kind of like Christianity. Like Christians say some really great things about how we should act and love each other and treat each other, but there's a whole lot of bullshit that comes with it, and a whole lot of assuming. Even if it's not complete bullshit, some of it's just like a lot of assuming of things and how people psychologically work. You know what I mean? So I kind of see it like that. But the thing I have an issue with, one of the biggest things that I started seeing, because right after I left religion, I started participating in a lot of feminist groups on Facebook and stuff, because a lot of my friends were really hardcore feminists, and you know, my friend's roommate, I hung out with my friend all the time because she was like the only non-religious person I knew. And all her roommates, she's not a feminist, but all her roommates are these really hardcore feminists. But participating on these websites, a lot of these girls were people who had left religion, left specific, like Bob Jones University Christianity, like pink side of the road and the blue side of the road, you're not allowed to walk on the same side, and you have to wear tights and then skirts down to their ankles, like legitimate like restrictions on women's freedoms,
right?
Like within those circles. So they come out and they feel oppressed because they actually were, and they come out and then they're told that they are still oppressed by the patriarchy, and they still are, you know, they still are under this kind of oppression. And so what happens is that from what I've seen, from all these girls that I've seen talking, they stay in a perpetual state of victimization.
Right.
They believe that their autonomous choices don't matter in their lives, because even if they made a choice to go into the STEM field, they would be discriminated against to the point where they wouldn't want to do it anyway. They believe that.
Right.
And the thing is, if you want to not be a victim, you have to stand up and say, I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm going to do all this stuff myself. And if there's no legal restrictions against you saying that, I can't see why they can't be like self-actualized, where they can't stand up and say, okay, like this is where I came from and this is where I want to be. I'm going to get there. If I want to have muscles, I'm going to take Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and beat the shit out of people.
Right.
Like it's to me, it just seems so simple and straightforward of like, you want something to change in your life, you do it yourself. You don't blame it on a system, because we're always going to be living in a system, and there's always going to be someone who's not benefiting from that system. Ultimately, we're never going to be equal. So we have to get to the point where if we're equal under the law and we're able to have those legal equalities, ultimately we just have to let people go and make their own decisions and be self-actualizing. I don't know if I'm using that right.
No, I think I see what you're saying. I understand where I don't really agree. I mean, I agree with it. I agree that what you're saying is good. I mean, I would never discourage people from trying to be self-actualizing. I mean, I think if you are someone who wants to go into a particular field, even if you think that you will face discrimination or whatever, or it will be a difficult road for you. I mean, if you're determined to do it, I think you should do it. You know, I don't think, and honestly, I don't see in my experience and with the feminists that I interact with, I don't see a lot of people who are using the victimization that they experience as an excuse. I see them complaining about things that they experience themselves. You know, I don't, and the thing about, you know, people saying, well, I would go into the STEM field, but I assume I would face discrimination. I mean, far more often I hear people say I work in the STEM field as a woman and I do experience this sort of discrimination, you know? So it's not as if people are just sitting around going, well, you know, everything sucks and it sucks to be a woman. And they have no experience to back that up. It's that they are responding to the experiences that they have actually had. And a lot of other people are having, you know, similar experiences.
So I wanted to respond to something you said at the very beginning of the video, and something that kind of not irritates, but when I'm having a conversation with anybody who's into social justice as it stands today, not necessarily who wants social justice, but what, you know, the internet has deemed social justice warriors. There's this idea that that a lot of people talk about experiences. And I can say this, I've taken feminist studies classes where they literally talk about how it's a part of masculine, or it's part of the patriarchy, that people's personal experiences are underneath objective reality. Like legitimately, I've read articles that were propped up in these classes about how scientists, like I read this article was about how scientists put everything under a microscope and they just want facts and things like that. Personal experience is important, and it is very important for each individual's person, like how they live their lives. It's data points that they can use to help them understand their world. But ultimately, a personal experience is one data point.
Right.
Ultimately, like, we have to do things like take an objective look at an aggregate of people, of what their experiences are. And I'm not sure how many studies have actually been done on people's claims of discrimination. And it's also not, I'm not trying to minimize any discrimination. Like I had a friend who was discriminated against by one scientist. She was going into neurology, and she had this horrible experience with this one scientist who had a horrible attitude towards her because she was Black.
Right.
Like legitimately, that's what he said.
Yeah.
And he was penalized for it and taken out of his position and things like that. And the thing is, there are always going to be people. They're going to be dickheads. And
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not, when someone gives me their personal experiences, I feel very deeply for them. Like my friend, I was ready to take a knife to this guy. Like I wouldn't actually do that. That's not a real threat. I don't want anybody to
Right. But yeah.
Don't send the FBI at me. But like I was literally like, I'm that person where I want, like if something happens to my friend, I am at that guy's door and I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? You better not hurt her. You know, that kind of thing. So I lost my train of thought. But yeah,
personal
they're just
experience.
you know, it's not, the thing is, people take their a lot of times I hear a lot of people taking their personal experiences and the people that they're talking to. Like, for instance, I've been going around, I've been making a habit of asking all my atheist friends that are women about discrimination and how they felt in the atheist community. Right. Not one of them has said that they've ever experienced any kind of discrimination against them in the atheist community.
Okay.
I don't know whether that's true. It's their perception. They might have experienced something that they never even perceived. Or somebody more sensitive, not in a bad way, but just like more, you know, there's sensitive people are great, might have experienced something that they attributed to sexism. And then they walk around feeling like that's what things are, you know?
Yeah.
You know, we can't, personal experiences are important, but we can't talk about personal experiences as a good base for a worldview.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that I think we should always be very careful of generalizing too much based on our individual experience.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's very important. But when you do have large groups of people that all testify to having similar experiences, and I'm not necessarily talking about in the form of like a formal study, but you know, one of the great revolutionary things about second wave feminism was the fact that, you know, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique. Women started to read it, and all of a sudden there was this awakening culturally where you know, lots and lots of women from all different walks of life and all different parts of the world and parts of the country started to realize that they had very similar experiences. You know, and they could come together and they could talk about their experiences, and they all knew what each other was talking about. Oh, you feel this way too? You felt this way too? This happened to you? And
it's hard to put your finger on. Yeah, like I'm not saying that doesn't happen. What I'm saying is if we don't have data in front of us, we can't have as much of a roadmap. And it might just be me. I put a lot of stock in more objective things. Like I have a really hard time. I think it was just the way I was. Anyway, I interrupted you.
Well, no, I
keep doing that.
You're
I'm a lovely person.
You're all right. Data is very important. I'm not going to say that, you know, that data should be dismissed or that we shouldn't want to have, you know, scientifically rigorous studies of these things as much as is possible. You know, I don't know of any studies that have been made to sort of attempt to measure, you know, like for instance, in the atheist community, how much women experience discrimination on the basis of their gender. But I do know that there have been many studies, to take it, you know, outside the atheist community. There have been many studies that establish that the sorts of sexist attitudes that people often attribute that kind of discrimination to are real and exist and are fairly widely held. You know, so to me,
what do you mean specifically a sexist? Name a sexist attitude that you're talking about. Like that is within, like, widely held within the atheist community.
Within the atheist community, well,
yeah, specifically, because I mean, you made a video about that, so
yeah. Well, the video was about how much anti-feminism there is in the atheist community, and
anti-woman.
No, not Not necessarily,
Because I would consider
but
myself an anti-feminist
right, but
in a lot of ways. You know,
yeah,
not. I mean, I don't like labels necessarily, so don't call me
yeah.
an anti-feminist.
No, I
Don't call
won't.
me an MRA. I'm not an MRA. Although I
No,
will defer to you in all circumstances. So
no, you've already been way too reasonable to qualify as an
you'd
MRA.
be surprised. I
Um,
think what happens is you're talking to people who, because I argue with MRAs, you know,
yeah,
I tell them what's up, but they're always really respectful to me because I'm respectful to them, and I think a lot of times you do kind of come off as a little bit. You've already have this idea, like nobody gets their. I see some of your Facebook posts too. I'm just like, dude, like this looks
if
like
you're
it's
going
completely
to
out of context, and I
no,
but like
well, look,
people are already angry at you. That's the problem.
if you're going if you're going to say that I'm disrespectful towards MRAs, I will plead guilty to that. I don't respect them.
Okay.
I don't respect them, and I don't respect their point of view. I don't respect their
What
arguments.
about their point of view?
I don't respect
What
them.
about their point of view? You've already
I,
said in one of your MRA videos that the actual things that they claim,
that they
like
yes
that are good, right?
that they claim to be concerned about are good, but I don't see very much evidence that they're actually concerned about these things. And that's one of the things
Why?
that's
What do
one
you
of the
see as
things
lack of evidence that they're actually concerned about these things?
because they don't advocate for any real change. All they do is piss and moan about stuff on the internet. I mean,
That is part of advocating. I mean, how
yeah,
much do you do outside of talking about things on YouTube?
well, I don't do anything, but lots of people do lots of see. I don't see the real world activist making things happen wing of the men's rights
Yeah.
activists. You know,
I think
and to
though,
me, no,
yeah.
to me
I'll let
that
you
may
continue. Sorry.
well just because this is something that I like to bring up whenever it comes up is that because you know a lot of times men's rights activists and people who are sympathetic to them who don't necessarily identify as MRAs themselves try to paint try to paint you know opponents of the MRAs as anti-male
No, no.
I don't I completely reject that. I don't think I'm anti-male at all. I think that it's disgusting that men's rights activist groups will exploit legitimate issues that affect vulnerable men to try and cover their own misogyny. Um,
So
and
you think that they're legitimately anti-woman?
yeah, yeah, I do. Now, I'm not going to say
Like
that every.
what
I won't.
specifically?
I won't say that
Like,
every.
give me an example of what you're talking about, because I mean it's easy to make a wide. For instance, like you claim that they don't necessarily advocate.
Right.
So what I have seen in my experience, like I don't have a statistic and I
Right. Right.
don't
Right.
know this. I don't know the stories very well because I'm not an MRA, and I'm not actually. I mean, I'm interested in making sure that the men in my life are respected and taken care of and
Right.
loved, and that they don't stick their dick in crazy, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm interested in. But when it comes to actual rights, like I'm an advocate for people's rights when it comes to having these kinds of discussions, but I would prefer doing service projects like feeding the homeless and
Oh,
building
sure.
houses and stuff. I've done a lot of like those kinds of projects. So that's more of my interest. So I'm not an MRA and I don't
Sure.
advocate for their rights. So one of the issues that I've seen is that women actually do get a lot of women's groups do get a lot of assistance from the government and from donations and a lot of extra things. Everybody wants to support these groups because that's the good thing to do.
Right.
Point. Our culture wants to support feminism and women's rights. They want women to be equal. Everybody wants, not everybody, but
Yeah. Yeah.
when
It's
I say
widely
all, I don't
accepted.
mean all,
Yeah. It's widely
obviously,
accepted.
because it's widely accepted. But what happens is, and I've seen articles like this, there's specific instances, I don't see a study on it, is that when an issue comes up, that men say, hey, this is an issue for us, it's dismissed. They're called MRAs, even if they're not. They are told that they should be focusing on feminism, and feminism is going to fix their issue when feminism isn't fixing their issue. And things like, for instance, there was a male, I saw, there was an article the other day, it was a guy who had a men's victim abuse shelter. He ran it and he committed suicide because some of the hate that he was getting based off of this one shelter.
Right.
There's a lot of anti-MRA, anti-men's rights people out there who are saying you guys are just misogynist for standing up and saying I'm having this issue. And I think that just like when Christians approach the atheist community and they start saying all these apologetic things, a lot of atheists who came from religious backgrounds who were really hurt by their religion lash out wrongly to the Christians who are coming in just trying to figure things out.
Right.
And I think that when it comes to people like you who are advocates for things and who say that they do not like MRAs, as soon as you took a step in that direction, you're going to be met with certain forms of hostility. Because I do think MRAs are just as hostile as some of the MRA groups that I've seen can be very hostile if you're not talking to them. Same as feminist groups.
Right.
Like I have received a lot of hostility from feminist groups when I've talked about these issues. And I can be really strong, but ultimately I respect them as human beings, and you can tell that. So even me, I receive hate and from these groups that I got kicked out of one of the groups.
Right. Well,
I'm just saying that when you're pointing fingers and you're saying this, there is a lot of obstacles that they have to overcome. And another thing too is men don't want to take care of men. Men want to take care of women. Which
is something that feminism wants to correct. I mean, to me, that would fall under the umbrella of toxic masculinity, which is a feminist concept, which to me does far more to explain and illuminate the ways in which our culture is harmful to men than anything men's rights activists have ever come up with.
What do you mean by toxic masculinity?
Toxic masculinity is the idea, is the notion that like you just said, men are conditioned to want to take care of women, right? Men are.
I don't think it's a condition. I don't think it's conditioned though.
Well, I do.
Okay, sorry, yeah. I'm just letting you know that yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I think it's a cultural
You have your
thing.
definition. You have your definition. I keep interrupting you. I'm such an ass. I'm so sorry.
You're all right. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
I get so excited about this kind of topic because I talk about it all the time, and I'm obsessed.
If we were, yeah, I can tell. If we were in the same room, I'm sure we'd be interrupting each other all the time.
Yeah.
But no, I do.
Like, bitch.
I'm
just kidding.
That would probably not happen.
I love I love making those jokes because you get this face and you're like, probably no, I wouldn't do that. No,
I don't hit women. I don't hit women. I don't hit women. But
much anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that classic example of the loaded question. So when did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah. I don't know. I like being hit. I'm just saying.
Well, but
seriously, like I do a lot of martial arts and stuff. I like being hit.
But in a very different context, I'm sure. I mean,
yeah. Like legitimately, I'm like, I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a year, and I'm like, no,
cool.
This isn't gonna cut it. I gotta get hit.
So maybe we shouldn't have these discussions in person. I might.
I'm just no. I'm not a violent person.
You might break bad.
Martial arts people are some of the most peaceful, non-violent people.
I know.
Anyway, you were saying. Sorry.
I know a few people who are into martial arts, and
you were defining
they're not violent
toxic,
people. Yeah,
you were defining toxic masculinity.
It's the idea that when men feel compelled to be overprotective of women, men feel pressured to be the breadwinners, to be the protectors. Men are sort of told or feel as though they need to be masculine, they need to be manly, that men showing signs of things that are stereotypically thought of as feminism, as feminine, is bad. This is the sort of thing that toxic masculinity deals with. And it comes up when people who are concerned about men's issues, including people who are legitimately concerned about it, not men's rights activists, when they talk about how like the suicide rate among men is much, much higher than among women. Men tend to be incarcerated at a higher percentage than women, the concept of toxic masculinity is an attempt to explain why this happens under a feminist theory umbrella.
Yeah.
And to say that even though feminism is centered on women, and even though the primary goal of feminism is to empower women, that it's important to recognize that the current system is harmful to men in many ways as well.
Okay.
And I just want to draw, now that we've brought that up, I do want to say I do draw a line between, you know, people I would call MRAs, or in general, like people that would fall into the category of what people sometimes refer to as the manosphere.
Okay.
I draw a line between those people and people who are legitimate advocates for men's issues. I mean, there are some really, really good groups like the Good Men Project, like Calm, that are centered on men, that advocate for men's rights, that are not anti-feminist, that are not anti-woman, that do not run on this sort of misogynistic rage that MRA groups tend to run. So, I mean, there is such a thing as real legitimate advocacy for men's issues. And you're right, they don't get enough support. They do deserve more support. Men who are victims of domestic violence often have a really hard time finding a place to go, because most domestic violence shelters are focused on women. And I don't have a problem with that, because women are victims of domestic violence as a percentage more often than men. But the fact that there are almost no places for men to go is a problem, and that's something that we need to address, you know. There's a difference between advocating for men's rights and being a men's rights activist. It's a shame that they adopted that name, because, you know, that the term men's rights activist should not be such a toxic term. It is, because so many of the people who claim it behave in such a toxic way, you know.
Yeah, that is the case. Like, I definitely see what you're saying there. Like, they're definitely, just like there's feminist groups who are just all like, God, what the fuck are you saying? Oh my God. You know, I'm sure there's groups that you're just like roll your eyes at too. But I kind of want to go back to what you were saying before, and I can't remember exactly what you were saying, so I can't remember exactly the point that I wanted to make about it. And it was about toxic masculinity, and then you said something along the lines of when, oh God, it was a really important point that I wanted to make too. I think the thing is, when we're talking about men being socialized into maybe the role of a breadwinner, for instance. Right. Oh, I remember my point.
Okay.
So whether this is biological or sociological, women tend to value or find value in themselves, just as who they are, what they like, just little things about themselves. Like they're told that they should value themselves because we're just inherently valuable, right? Whereas, right. And I think that's kind of natural. Like, women have wombs. We are more vulnerable, but we also have this gift of being able to give life, and that is inherently valuable. We, for thousands and thousands of years, have needed to depend on men's resources, and men have needed to consider women valuable just because they are women, because to motivate them to give their resources, right?
Right.
So I think like within that kind of, I think that men also have this opposite kind of mentality where they find value in what they do, in what they can accomplish. I mean, there's always outliers to every group, but it seems to me that that's a good explanation as to why certain things are what they are. I lost my train of thought, but that was a point that I wanted to make, and it had to do with toxic masculinity. Oh, I think that when we're talking about whether or not something that is masculine is toxic, I think that implies that there's something bad about super masculinity, or I think instead what happens is when we displace men out of finding value in what they do, as opposed to just find value for who they are, like it tends to kind of take them out of their element. Does that make sense? That's kind of an idea that I was thinking about, I was throwing around, because I think that when we say toxic masculinity, we're talking about like how many men there are in prisons, or whether or not they're allowed to be called gay.
Yeah,
that's part of it. But I think what happens is, like, we actually put men in a position where they don't know how to be men. They don't know how to find value in what they are. And so they end up finding value in what they do in bad ways. And I think that women can with our natural inclinations can do bad things too. Like you know, there can be like toxic femininity too. But like that's something, and you can probably even hear it in my voice. It's something that I haven't thought too deeply into, but that's just like an idea that I wanted to throw out, that there are differences between how men and women behave. And I think that a lot of times when we're saying feminism will fix things by making the work environment more equal and less competitive, or making certain things a certain way, I think that we're trying to fix things by making them more like what a woman would do, as opposed to saying, okay, there's nothing wrong with how masculine these men are. There's just something wrong with how they define their roles. And
I
we
think
need to give them good roles. We need to show them this is what a good competitive man is. You know what I mean? And the same thing too, we need to show women what it's like to respect men. I know that sounds I know that sounds out there, but what I'm saying is a lot of times when we say stuff like toxic masculinity, we're saying that there's an aspect of your masculinity that's too masculine, that's bad, and it can be kind of, you know what I mean?
I don't know. That might be a little bit of a misunderstanding
for what they do. It might be a misunderstanding. I mean, I think here I didn't have a whole lot of clear, coherent things to say in that point, and that just means I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
I will say, someone actually, I had never really considered the idea of toxic femininity, because that isn't that term isn't really used, because feminism has a much longer history of examining and critiquing.
Can I give you an example of what I mean?
Yeah, because I have examples too, but go ahead.
Okay, so toxic femininity would be those catty bitches that like just beat up on women.
Okay.
Like seriously, like women have a lot of in-group preference, which means that they have a lot of preference for having friendships with women, whereas men tend to go and seek out relationships, you know, be the ones who seek out relationships with women, right?
Right.
So but men also don't have as much of this innate, you are a man, I am a man, that's one point of connection that we have, is that we're men.
Right.
Being a man for a man doesn't automatically connect you with that man, whereas women, just based off of our experiences, there's this assumed like, you're a woman, I'm a woman, at least we have that in common.
Right.
But within our groups, we don't have places. Meaning, where men, if you get them all in a big group and you try to point them towards a task, like let's say a military, you get to the point where everybody kind of knows their place for the most part. Maybe one man will challenge another man and they'll beat up, and then you have respect for both because at least they stood up for each other, even the guy who lost, right?
Right.
Whereas women don't have that. As soon as you mess up, as soon as you say something stupid, that's like a stain on who you are. Like in extreme forms of femininity, there is no recovering. There is no, you at least fought, therefore. And there's a lot of undermining, a lot of like negative things about the behavior of women, that if women aren't taught how to channel those things in a positive way, for instance, positive criticism of your government.
Right.
Like women see things differently. It would be really great to have to make sure that women are able to have a say in what our government, obviously, because we do have a say.
Right.
But there is toxic femininity, and it has to do with our natural behaviors of women. And it's not toxic because it's too feminine. It's toxic because it is negative. It's a way of behaving that does not support society. And I think that it can go either way. But I don't think that it's toxic because our society has socialized them to be too feminine or too masculine. I think it's toxic because what we're talking about is a natural behavior that we haven't taught how to channel, because we don't have a good place in society for that behavior.
Yeah. I think it's not so much that with toxic masculinity, and also if we're going to try to talk about toxic femininity, I don't think it's so much that the problem is seen as people being too masculine or too feminine.
Yeah.
It's more about the pressure to, in the case of masculinity, to be masculine and to not be feminine in any measure. You know what I mean? Like a man is a man, and if a man does if anything about a man's behavior or attitude or whatever suggests something womanly or something feminine, that is unacceptable. It's more like that. It's not so much that, oh, he's too much of a man. It's that there's a pressure of a man is what you are and a man is what you must be, you know, and a woman is what you are and a woman is what you must be. And that's kind of where, if we're going to try to sort of come up with a theory of toxic femininity. And again, it's not something that I see really spoken about very much by feminists, because I think most of feminism already deals with gender roles, how they affect women. So there isn't as much of a feeling of a need for a specific toxic femininity theory. But someone asked me about it on a video a couple weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago now, because I had mentioned toxic masculinity. And they said, what about toxic femininity? And I suggested maybe one example would be the pressure for women to be caregivers and to sort of sublimate their own needs and sublimate themselves in service to their children or their spouse or whatever. And that can, in some cases, lead women to neglect their own health, you know. That was just an example I came up off the top of my head. And then someone wrote me an email and suggested beauty standards, like maybe women who feel pressured to maintain a certain beauty standard. That could be an example of toxic femininity, because it's the toxic masculinity idea is about very strong, sort of rigid following of the traditional gender roles, you know, to the exclusion of anything that falls outside of those lines.
That's true. That's true. If that's what toxic it is, if that's what it is that's toxic, then I can agree with that. When it comes to society saying that, but there is a certain amount of pressure that we're going to put on each other based on biology. You know what I mean? There's going to be a certain amount of pressure that we're going to put on men to be a certain way based off of biology, and it might not be something that they're completely 100%, you know, naturally inclined towards, but then they kind of even out. Like, I have a friend who is a male, because I have men friends, lots of men friends. So that means I'm not sexist, because I have men friends.
Exactly.
Actually, I think most of my friends are men. Most of my friends, but at any rate, so I'm not sexist because I have men friends.
You can't possibly be.
But yeah, like, and I'm thinking like specifically of one, and he is not the most masculine man in the world, but he still, when he thinks of relationship, he can't imagine a relationship where he's not taking care of his wife. Because he wants to do that. That's the role that he has determined would make him a man independently. But he's not the kind of, and his family's not the kind of family to pressure him into that role. You know what I mean? It's not like, and that we just go back to whether or not it's biology, whether it's mostly biology or mostly social. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Sorry.
Yeah. No,
I'm a little bit off because like we do have to end soon because people are messaging me and saying, where are you?
Okay.
I don't know why. Like, I told the guy to show up at like 1:30, but he's like here now going, hey. So
well, do you want to wrap up in the next couple minutes, and then you can be on your way?
We can wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so. He's not here yet, but he's gonna be knocking on my door in like no time.
I don't want to catch like your home invasion on the live stream, like people beating down the door. We have plans. You have to come with us.
That just happens all the time. Like, I'm just so popular. Oh my god. Let me real quick open the window because it all of a sudden got really hot in here.
Okay.
Because I'm just, you know.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, it's probably a problem you deal with every day. Yeah, don't you wish you had a sliding door like that? I wish I had a sliding door like that. I was just admiring your sliding door.
Oh, my sliding door?
I like sliding doors. We don't have one in the apartment we live in now. I used to have one. I always liked my nice.
I always tease my guy friends, and I was gonna do it with you, but I know that would be inappropriate and you'd feel awkward. I always tease my guy friends, and every time they say anything, I'm just like, oh, like you're admiring my sliding door.
Yeah, you can do that with pretty much anything, can't you?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because men, they're just all like, I don't want to admit that that's what I was thinking about,
Yeah.
but I know that everybody knows that's what I was thinking about.
Stop making me uncomfortable. Yeah.
So, but I like making people feel uncomfortable because that makes me that means that I'm comfortable.
Exactly. I'm comfortable when you're not comfortable.
Exactly. I'm a
Well,
sociopath. I enjoy other people's pain. No, I'm just joking.
it
I'm the
goes
opposite
well
of a sociopath. I love puppies. Alive. I love them alive.
a puppyopath.
Yeah.
Well, listen, if we're going to wrap this up, there is something that I think is something that if we're going to end on any note at all, I think the most important note to end on is to call attention to the fact that we've been talking for like an hour and a half, more than an hour and a half. We've disagreed with each other on a lot of stuff.
Everything.
But we have gotten along. We still like each other. We haven't hated each other or screamed at each other.
How do you know how I feel?
I'm assuming.
You know what they say of assuming.
Yes, indeed.
Ass out of you and me.
Exactly. But if you do hate me, you have disguised it very well.
No, I don't hate you. I think that's the thing is like, and that's what I said like in our private messages.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who hate you. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, I know.
But a lot of these main players who are really criticizing you, and they don't. Like everybody that I've seen that I've respected that's actually criticizing you starts out their video with saying, "Hey, I like Steve. I appreciate Steve."
It's.
But they don't do that with anybody else. Like I wouldn't say that in a video, like because you're just a nice guy, like legitimately a nice guy. So it's really hard to hate you. Like for instance,
thank you.
I know you do not like it when people say this, and I think you've even said it before that you don't want to talk to this guy. But I really think that you should go talk to Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm not saying that out of a place. I'm not saying that out of a place of, like, I don't let people deal with my business.
Right.
I don't think that he's going to school you, but I think that it would benefit him, and it would benefit you.
Well, then that's a reason not to do it.
Why?
If it would benefit him, that's a reason not to do it. I have no interest in benefiting him.
And changing his mind?
I don't care if I change his mind.
Why?
Because I think he's a troll. And it's not.
Have you watched any of his live streams?
No, I haven't. He's not someone that I take seriously at all. He's not someone because he's a misogynistic asshole. And he's completely ignorant on feminism, and yet he feels entitled to hold court about it. And I mean, from what I have seen of his stuff, his lack of information about feminism is appalling. And
tell him that. God, like he's like.
I just did. I'm sure someone's going to show this to him. I'm sure he has people who, anytime anyone mentions his name, they say, "Sargon, look, somebody mentioned your name," and then they'll sync right to this time code. So I mean, if he watches this video, I'll tell him now he doesn't know shit about feminism, and yet he feels entitled to hold court about it, and I don't respect that. And it's never going to happen. It's just, if you have a different opinion of him than I do, that's your opinion. It's just never going to happen. It's just never, ever going to happen.
I have a very different opinion. He reminds me of like an uncle. Like I kind of see him as my YouTube uncle, where like a long lost uncle that doesn't know me and I don't know him, but like I'm sure we'd meet up one day and he'd be like an awesome uncle. But like, I think that a lot of times, especially some of his older stuff, is a little bit like, oh my God, feminism is starting a Marxist society. Like, it's really funny though. Like I think he's absolutely hilarious in that way. But if you look at his live streams, like the thing is, I didn't really watch him until I saw some of his live streams. He brings on people who disagree with him constantly.
Oh, I know.
For the purpose of having that conversation. Like people who you would have thought he would have chewed out and had decent conversations where he's changed his mind on things. And I think that's the thing about him is he really does want. Everybody has their biases. Everybody has their extremes, and it's easy to be extreme on the internet, especially when you have a lot of people backing you up and saying, "Oh, you're so wonderful." But I think that he is a reasonable guy, and I think that he could have a reasonable conversation with you, and I think that you would hate him less if you had that conversation.
Well, I don't hate him. I mean, and I wouldn't say,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say that like it would be impossible. Like if we ran into each other at a bar somewhere that
Yeah.
it's impossible that we couldn't
Could
get
talk about
along.
your
Right.
beards.
Yeah. I
Just be
mean,
a lag.
I'm not saying that it's impossible that we couldn't, that we could get along. I'm sure I could probably get along with most people in person. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think one of the reasons why you and I get on so well is that we met each other in person, and we, you know, even though we disagree on a lot of stuff, we see each other as people and we get along.
I generally get
That's
along with
fine.
people anyway. I
Yeah,
always give
so
people
do
the
I.
benefit of the doubt to the
So
extreme sometimes, but like seriously, like, but there's people I do dislike and I do think are evil online. Not evil, but like,
yeah,
you
well,
know.
I mean, I don't think I wouldn't say that any of these people who have made videos about me are evil. Um, but it's just it's not so much that that I don't think we could get along, right?
Mm-hmm.
With a few of them, I think we probably could get along, you know. But I'm just not interested in that because when I see someone putting things out into the world that I consider to be awful,
Mm-hmm.
and I consider anti-feminism and misogyny and these sorts of things. I can and anything that is just sort of dismissive and derisive of the concept of social justice. I think that's just awful. I
So do
think
you
that
think that
does.
any of my views were awful today?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, but I don't hold you as an awful person because we have sort of a person to person relationship, you know.
Yeah.
I don't, and but again, I just when someone is as dismissive of social justice and spends as much time as they do, sort of stirring up resentment toward social justice activism, that's not someone I feel I I feel compelled to pay attention to. And
Okay.
I have way too much to do that I am interested in doing. And when I do have
Mm-hmm.
conversations like this, I prefer to have them with people like you
Okay,
who
that's fine.
we can amicably disagree. And I think you,
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
can
you know,
amicably disagree again. I'd love to amicably disagree after I read all these
yeah,
studies
we
and
can
been
do.
all smart and
I would,
knowing things.
I would love to do this again.
I have like red paper clips. They're so
That's
cute.
uh, I have black ones. Hang on, I have one clipping my mic
Red is a
cable to
better
my shirt.
color.
So, yeah.
Red is the only good color.
Do you say that because you're biologically
Yes.
inclined?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
100%. That is what I think.
It's a biological inclination that the red is better.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is it's all biological inclinations. I'm not saying that people are determined necessarily by their biology. I just think that that biology has more to say about these things than what feminists are giving credit to. So
Yeah.
a lot more. But yeah.
Okay. Well, like I say, I
Yeah.
mean, that's something I don't, it's not even that we disagree on that. I just think, I mean, I think biology does play a role. I don't think it plays as large a role in those sorts of things as you do. But like I say, if we imagine it as like a slider, you know, I put it more toward the social side and you put it more toward the
Yeah.
biological
Yeah.
side.
And for the most part, that's been our disagreement, you know?
Yeah, that's the thing that's sort of been running underneath everything.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry,
but
I had to message, and I know that's rude, but we're not on a date, so.
no, it's very unprofessional. You're on my YouTube channel. You're an invited guest, and you're checking your messages.
People are gonna love
very
me.
unprofessional.
I'm a character. People are gonna love me. That's why people love Milo, even though he's a dick.
Well, yes, I suppose people do love him.
I kind of like him.
I would not count myself.
I don't know. I like that rough, like in your face, like no bullshit, but I get to bullshit kind of thing. Like,
see, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting older, right? I'm way less tolerant of that than I used to be. I mean, there used to be
really?
people, yeah, there used to, when I was younger, there were people who I could say that about. I could say like, oh, I don't, I don't agree with what he's saying. I think it's kind of horrible, but he's funny. I like his personality. And I guess the older I get, the less tolerant I am of that sort of thing. I look at someone like that and I think, yeah, you're really making the world a shittier place.
Am I allowed to ask how old you are?
I'm 35.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Did you think I was younger? Huh?
Yeah. That's how old I am.
Oh shit, you're gonna make me look like an asshole. 25.
Yeah, good job.
Seriously? I got it right?
Yeah. 25 on the dot, November.
See, I hate to do that because I remember my dad told me a story once when he was at a party with some people and a woman said, "Guess how old I am?" and he guessed like way older than she actually was, and she was really
Toxic
offended.
femininity.
And yeah,
I'm just
exactly.
saying.
My own father felt
Mm-mm.
toxic femininity.
It's because women, like, there is a natural, I think, more of a natural inclination for women to find value in their body and how they look and how
Yeah.
their body functions, whether or not they can have children, those kinds of things. So, like, it would make sense to me that the older you get as a woman, the more, since the more your attractiveness level can go down and like your ability to have children, that there might be more of a natural thing there. I don't know if that's 100% natural, but like it seems to make sense that that would be something a woman would take offense to. So,
yeah. Well, I mean,
anyway.
Anyway, it seems natural in the sense that I guess it's not something you consciously decide. But again, I think that's probably something we would disagree on as to whether or not it's socialization or biology. But
Yeah, and that's a big argument. I think a
it's certainly not a
takeaway,
settled argument at all. I mean,
I even wrote this down in big letters, and it's not in red ink; it's black ink, so it's not like angry letters.
good.
But the biggest takeaway that I wanted to walk away with, and you kind of understanding, not like I'm schooling anybody because I'm not a teacher, but is that there are two ideas as to why there is this idea of like there's a difference between what women and men have and what they produce.
Right.
And I think that when people talk to you about the biological side of it, I think what they're really trying to do, or what it should do, is make you stop and think and say, hey, like, I have to take less stock in what I believe because they have as much evidence as I do. We don't know how much of it is social and how much of it is biological.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest point that I wanted to make in this video is when somebody makes certain comments, I think that it's really important to stop and think and say, is this person trying to just disprove everything I say, or they're trying to make a point that helps me reevaluate my beliefs? Because I think that in a lot of videos, the thing that I was really upset about, and the reason why I commented on Seth Andrews' thing, is a lot of times I think that you don't walk away reconsidering your beliefs with every conversation.
Well, it depends on what the conversation is. I
Yeah.
mean, I think a lot of people, especially with the anti-feminist stuff, like I will give you this: the biology versus socialization thing. That is not a settled argument, right? I mean,
Not at all.
not just between us, like just in general. Like
evolutionary
that's
psychology is new, but it's really
Yeah.
gaining ground because it's a very efficacious field. It makes really great predictions that turn out to be helpful.
It's a very open question, right? So for something like that, if you raise good points about that, that is certainly something that I need to take in and consider, absolutely. But if we're dealing with something that, in my mind and in the mind of lots of other people, is a settled question, like for instance, is feminism a good thing? To me, that's an argument that I'm not interested in having, or is feminism a religion? That's just a stupid question. I don't even entertain that question. That to me shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what feminism is.
When people are saying that feminism is religious, what they're commenting on the attitudes of people and the lack of skepticism. For instance, I could say that I brush my teeth religiously, or I go to the library religiously, or I am religious about going to the library. What you're saying is that I am uncompromising, and I am habitually uncompromising on this particular issue.
Well, yeah,
and so I think that when people say that, it might not reflect 100% how you actually are, because every accusation is going to be extreme, because when someone accuses you of something, there's always two sides to it.
Right.
But when a large portion of people are saying that to you, I think that it's important to take a step back and ask questions and consider why they're saying that. Ask them, like, why do you say that I'm religious? Is it because of my idea or how I hold my idea, or explain to me what's going on? And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
and a lot of times, you know, people will say, well, because women aren't oppressed. And again, I'm willing to have that conversation with you
yeah,
because we're friendly with each other. But if some stranger on the internet just leaves a comment on a video saying women aren't oppressed, my instinct is
yeah.
to not listen to anything else that person says, because I don't think that's an
Hmm.
I just don't think that's borne out by the facts. You know, I
Hmm.
think a lot of times when people say, well, feminism is religious, I think what they're implying, and often they don't just imply it, they actually explicitly will say this, that feminism is dogmatic. And I just don't see that. I mean, I don't see that feminism is dogmatic at all. I think that,
Why do you think? What do you see as non-dogmatic about feminism?
well,
Like,
I think
what would you
it's,
consider? What would it take for it to be dogmatic? Like, you know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I think it's not dogmatic because its core principles are based on responses to real conditions. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, I think if women,
But
if
we have already talked about whether or not those conditions are real under the terms of feminism. Like the idea of the patriarchy could be minimized by maybe biological factors.
oh, sure, it could
Yeah.
be, you know,
Okay.
but
That's not dogmatic to admit. That's anti-dogmatic to
no,
admit.
I'm not. Well, and I, like I say, the biological versus sociological thing is an unsettled question. So I mean, and I think most people would agree to that. You know, I don't think you'd find very many people who would be willing to say, you know, with absolute conviction that, you know, this plays a larger role than that. You
Yeah.
know, overall, I mean, in certain situations, maybe we can make more confident statements.
Yeah.
But anyway, I know you have to go.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely. It was a really great conversation. I think that's
yes.
was productive for me. I have a lot of things to think about, and I hope that my very strong personality didn't oppress you. Gynocentrism, y'all. Just to say,
I am not. Let me tell you something. I am
white cisgendered male,
a white cisgender.
patriarchal society. You
I
scum.
I am a white cisgender hetero male uh, who has enough money to pay his bills. The only underprivileged thing about me is that I'm an atheist, so I almost never feel oppressed ever. So don't worry about that.
I feel oppressed every day in the
You,
wintertime when I have to step out of my door and it's freezing out.
yeah, that sucks. I feel. Oh, you know what I do? I feel that oppression.
Yeah,
I feel that oppression very keenly.
yeah. Anyway, I'll
Yes.
let you go. Like I said, it was a great conversation.
Yes. And if you want to do it again sometime, I would be 100% up for it.
We will have another
So,
conversation.
okay. All right.
Like I said before, I have to read these 3 books plus some. I got a new printer for Christmas, and it's like this mega printer that prints out everything.
Oh, wow. So you're a
And
paper
it's great.
person. You don't read like on tablets or
I
screen.
can't. I
Yeah.
can't. My brain doesn't do things. Like literally, I'll sit there and I'll read the line. It's like, this is supposed to move because it's on a screen. It's supposed to do its own thing. I'm not supposed to have to think about this because that's what screens are for. Screens are for not thinking.
They're for doing your work for you.
Yeah.
You want to have like
So,
a teleprompter. You just want
yeah.
to be able to have
Plus,
it scroll.
plus, you can't write fun notes on things. Like, for instance, I was complaining. Anyway, so I'll let you go.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. This
All
was a
right.
lot of fun. I hope
Yeah,
everybody
absolutely.
watching enjoyed it.
I can't wait to see what the comments are and see how everybody thinks I'm pretty and obnoxious. So
Everybody watching, when you comment when this is over, tell Kayla how pretty and obnoxious she is.
and talk about how like I am such a cunt. I give everybody permission. It's not going to be oppressive if everybody just talks about how much of a bitch I am.
Please don't call her a cunt or a bitch. I don't
Okay.
care if I don't care
But
if
his
she's
channel. Go to my channel. Everybody, go to my channel.
go to her
Kay Zak,
channel.
From Point, and just talk about like make sure you have a little smiley face after so I know it's you. But like just talk about how much of a bitch I am. I will prove that misogyny exists by this.
Go to my channel. And
Everybody do that for me.
Little smiley face.
As long as you say I'm a pretty bitch or a sexy bitch.
Yes. See, now there's
Right.
the comment section is going to be such a mess. Okay.
Oh my god.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, Mila. Bye. Thanks for watching, everybody.